Thank you, Father, for the privilege that you've given us to come together each Wednesday morning and explore your word. We ask that your Spirit open our minds and our hearts to the things that we will see this morning, that these things might become a source of blessing and challenge. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, continuing with our study of, started off just being limited to the Mosaic covenant, but now it's gotten bigger. We're going to talk this morning about the difference between the way man can approach God under the Mosaic covenant versus on us during the church age. We'll start off there, and then we're going to look at a few other things. All right. The Christian in this present age, the church age, is under grace, and he's not under the law. With that fact, we enjoy many privileges that are not enjoyed by the Israelite believer under the law. One key difference is how each group is to approach God. For us, the cross and the judging of sin is history. For the Israelite that was under the law, the cross and the judgment of sin was yet future. That simple fact made all the difference in the world in how each group was or is allowed to interact with God. There was a barrier that stood between the Israelite and God, which was sin not yet judged and personified in the law and symbolized by the veil between the holy place and the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and later the permanent temple in Jerusalem. That veil stood as a virtually impenetrable barrier that separated sinful man from the most holy part of the temple. It is said that it was very thick and it was unable to be ripped apart by teams of oxen. No one except the high priest could enter behind the veil, and then only once a year on Yom Kippur, which we'll look at a little later. Because sin had not yet been dealt with during the age of the law, holy God was compelled to maintain his distance from sinful man. Thus, man could approach God only so far, and then through a mediator in the form of a specialized priesthood, the Levitical priest of the family of Levi. And then came the cross. Jesus the Christ was nailed upon it, and he took the sins of the world upon himself, and he was judged in our place. And the barrier that stood between the believer and God, that veil in the temple, was rent in two by what happened at the cross, signifying that the barrier of sin had been dealt with, introducing a new way for man to approach God directly without the need of an intermediary in the office of a formal priesthood. Hebrews 4:14 says this: "Since then we have a high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." The believer in his church age has the authority to, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace directly and without a priest intermediary. That's because sin has been judged, and one of the benefits of being a believer is we possess the imputed righteousness of Christ. You've seen this passage before, but here it is again, Romans 3:21. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. God looks at the church age believer boldly approaching the throne of grace and does not see his sins, but sees the imputed righteousness of Christ. We can go directly to God. The Israelite under the law was limited in that respect. Yes, he could pray, but prayers were in the context of the law and especially in the context of the Levitical offerings at the temple. It appears that for some endued with the Spirit, they could go directly to God. What we are going to look at now is how the Israelite under the law related to God, because the law was very specific in how the Israelite was allowed to approach him. The Christian today is the temple, and we enjoy the indwelling of God. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. The believer under the law did not have such privilege, at least not on a universal level. For the Jew under the law, God resided not in the believer, but in the tabernacle or temple in the form of his Shekinah glory in the Holy of Holies. In doing so, God maintained his distance from sinful man. Exodus 40:34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of the meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. This rather long passage that we're about to read shows how the smoke and the fire related to the presence of God's glory in the temple and regulated when the Israelites in the wilderness were to camp or to decamp. Numbers 9:15 is where we find this. On the day that the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony. And at evening, it was over the tabernacle like the appearance of fire until morning. So it was always, the cloud covered it by day and appearance of fire by night. And whenever the cloud lifted over the tent, after the people of Israel set out, and in the place where the cloud settled down, there the people of Israel camped. At the command of the Lord, the people of Israel set out, and at the command of the Lord, they camped. As long as the cloud rested over the tabernacle, they remained in camp. Even when the cloud continued over the tabernacle many days, the people of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud was a few days over the tabernacle, and according to the command of the Lord, they remained in camp. Then according to the command of the Lord, they set out. And sometimes the cloud remained from evening until morning. And when the cloud lifted in the morning, they set out. Or if it continued for a day and a night, when the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether it was 2 days or a month or a longer time that the cloud continued over the tabernacle, abiding there, the people of Israel remained in camp and did not set out. But when it lifted, they set out. At the command of the Lord, they camped. And at the command of the Lord, they set out. They kept the charge of the Lord at the command of the Lord by Moses. So God allowed only the high priest to approach him behind the veil in the Holy of Holies, and the only place, only once a year, as previously noted. The common Israelite could approach God only so far as the outer courts and only through the Levitical priesthood and a system of sacrifices. The priest could go into the tabernacle or the temple called the holy place, but not the Holy of Holies. Through this process defined in the law, holy God meets sinful man halfway but maintains a respectable distance from him. Now, Leviticus and the law. The Jews especially revere the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, as something very special to them. These are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These books are at the very heart of their identity as Jews and covers their history from Abraham through all the aspects of the law that was given him by God. The first four books contain a lot of detail relating to, the last four books of that five contain a lot of detail relating to the Mosaic covenant and the law. Exodus chapters 25 through 40 speaks of the construction of the tabernacle and the articles of worship. Leviticus is where most of the meat is concerning the law, while Numbers and Deuteronomy have further details and builds upon what was spelled out in Leviticus. We're going to now take a look at Leviticus. This will not be a verse-by-verse study of Leviticus, which you probably should be thankful for, which would take months. Thus, I will attempt to limit the details to what I think is important to our understanding of the law of Moses.
We are thankful.
If you really want the detail, and it is worth the effort, I suggest you start reading in Exodus 25 and plow all the way through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Good study Bible might be helpful. Our focus is going to be on what the law required of the Israelite who had to live under its ordinances, the meanings of some of that, and how it pointed to Christ. Let's begin with the ordinances, or some people call it rules. The law laid down an extensive set of rules by which the nation was to live under. Now, let me repeat that the law was never intended to be a system by which the Israelite could find salvation. It might lead them to faith, but the Israelite could not be saved by keeping the law. One reason was it was impossible to keep the law. The law covenant, excuse me, was created as a system by which the nation would be managed and as a teaching aid concerning God's perfect righteousness and his plan for salvation. In the law, there were 613 different rules of life that ranged from what we commonly recognize as sin, to dress codes, to social conduct, dietary regulations, Sabbath observances, health issues, various sacrifices, and the feast days required to be observed. Let's look at a few examples of what we find in Leviticus. There's this issue of clean and unclean creatures. That's found in Leviticus 11, 1 through 47. This called for the Israelite to abstain from eating certain animals, birds, and sea creatures because they were declared to be unclean. Now, it should be understood that unclean does not necessarily mean it's dirty in the sense of hygiene or unhealthy to consume, but relates more to the idea of being ceremonially unclean. It is unclear exactly what was meant by this term, and many opinions have been offered. One proposition was that the animals so declared as unclean were generally carriers of some form of disease that was transmittable to humans, which is the case with some, such as pigs and rabbits, but not all on the list. Some posit that the meat of these unclean animals spoiled rapidly and became corrupted. Remember, they had no refrigeration and only drying or salt to preserve food. Animals not cloven-footed and chewing their cuds were generally excluded as unclean. This included the pigs and camels, for example. It also excluded carnivores and birds of prey such as eagles and buzzards, presumably because they might have been in contact with something dead, which has its own set of unclean rules. It also excluded shellfish of various kinds. While the rationale for the classifications is still debated, the objective is clear, and that is to set the Israelite apart from his neighbors as God's holy people. Also, these distinctions in the dietary realm might serve to remind the Israelite to make similar distinctions in the area of morals. This prohibition no longer applies in the church age, and we see that in Acts 10, where we see Peter. He fell into a trance, saw the heavens open, and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. But there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." But the voice came to him again a second time, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. That word translated common in this context means Levitically unclean. And unclean means unclean in a ceremonial sense. Peter is referring to the food prohibitions under the law. Obviously, at least some of the all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air that were contained in this giant sheet were on the list of foods prohibited under the law. But God's saying that no longer applies and orders Peter to eat. Verse 15, what God has made clean, do not call common. Women were also declared unclean during menstruation and after giving birth. Interestingly, if she bore a female child, the period of uncleanness was twice as long than if she had a son, 2 weeks versus 1 week. It's not clear why this is the case. Leprous diseases and purification. This series of passages focus on leprosy, or what we call Hansen's disease today, and similar diseases. It specifies how the priest is to diagnose the disease and treatments along with provisions for the infected to be declared clean once again, if he has healed. Hansen's disease was not actually seen in the Middle East until around the 1st century BC, but other similar afflictions and viruses were present prior to that. Discharges from male and female reproductive organs. This included both natural intercourse and disease-related discharges. This is not a suggestion that sex is unclean because God created the reproductive process. Obviously, this is not a conclusive list of issues covered under the law of Moses, but is some of what is found in Leviticus. Numbers and Deuteronomy have many other issues that require addressing by the Israelite under the law. Anybody have any questions on this at this point? Okay, moving along. Let's look at offerings. Laws of blood sacrifice, ceremonial ablutions, and religious festivals abound in the ceremonial laws of the Mosaic covenant. The ceremony was the means of regular reinforcement and instruction, as well as the vehicle of worship. The sacrifices were theological preparation for the Messiah's atoning work. Under the law, the Israelite was required to make certain offerings and sacrifices for various reasons. Some of these were giving back to the Lord in worship and thanks for a bountiful harvest, and others dealt with sins, we are going to see. There are 5 main categories of offerings. Let's look at the burnt offering. What was offered? A bullock or sheep or goat or 2 turtle doves, according to the ability of the offerer, were offered. If it was from the herd or flock, it had to be a year old and without blemish. What was the offerer's work here? The offerer led the offering to the door of the tabernacle, laid his hands on it, slew it, skinned it, and cut it into pieces, washed the parts, and gave it to the priest. The priest's work was the priest caught the blood, sprinkled it on the altar, and placed the parts in order on the altar. Thus it was called a whole burnt offering. God's portion in this was all that was burned on the altar was considered to be God's. The priest's portion was he got the skin. The offerer got nothing out of this. Symbolism was this was represented the complete consecration of the offerer to God. He's committing himself to God. The typical teaching here was that Christ giving himself as a whole burnt offering on the altar of the cross is the symbolism here. Then we have the meal offering. Well, what was offered? Unbaked flour ground fine, or baked cakes, or green ears of corn, parched or roasted. It was mixed with oil, seasoned with salt, and the fire was sprinkled with frankincense. It must contain no leaven or honey. The offerer's work, the offerer simply brought the offering to the priest. The priest's work, the priest threw a handful of the offering and all of the frankincense on the altar fire. God's portion was the handful of the offering with the frankincense. The priest's portion got the remainder of the offering. The offerer's portion, he got none of it back. The symbolism, it represented the consecration of the offerer's toil and what God had blessed him with. The typical teaching, Christ's life and work offered to God as perfect and fragrant. The peace offering. What was offered? A bullock, a lamb, or goat, male or female. Offerer's work. The offerer led the offering to the door of the tabernacle, laid his hands upon it, killed it, opened it, took out the fat and the kidneys, and gave it to the priest to be burned. The priest's work, the priest caught the blood, sprinkled it around the altar, and waved the breast and the right shoulder before the Lord. God's portion, all that got burned. The priest's portion, the waved breast and the shoulder, was kept for the priest. The offerer's portion, the remainder of the offering, which he must eat with his family and friends in the court of the tabernacle. Symbolism of this was the reconciling the offerer with God. The typical teaching, Christ is our peace offering. Then we have sin offerings. What was offered? A bullock or goat, male or female, a lamb according to the position of the offerer. The offerer's work. The offerer led the offering to the door of the tabernacle, laid his hands on it, killed it, opened it, took out the fat and kidneys, and gave it to the priest to be burned. The priest's work. The priest, if for others, smears the blood on the horns of the altar and pours out the rest at the base of the altar. If the sacrifice is for the nation, he sprinkles the blood before the veil and on the horns of the altar of incense, then pours out the rest at the base of the altar. What's God's portion of this offering? Everything that was not consumed on the altar was burned outside the camp. The priest's portion, all that remained of the meat, could be consumed by the priest. The offerer's portion got nothing. The symbolism, the forgiveness of sins of the offerer. The typical teaching, Christ is our sin offering. Then we have the trespass offering. What's offered? A female lamb or kid, or 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, or 1/10 of a part of ephah of flour, according to the ability of the offerer. It must contain no oil or frankincense. The offerer's work. The offerer led the offering to the door of the tabernacle, laid his hands upon it, killed it, opened it, took out the fat and kidneys, and gave it to the priest to be burned. The same as the sin offering. The priest's work. The priest, if for others, smears the blood on the horns of the altar and pours out the rest at the base of the altar. If it's for the nation, he sprinkles the blood before the veil and on the horns of the altar of incense, then pours out the rest at the base of the altar. That's the same as for the sin offering. God's portion was all that was burned on the altar. The priest's portion, what was not burned on the altar, the offerer's portion, he got nothing. Symbolism, it was restitution for sin. The typical teaching, Christ is our trespass offering. The first three offerings, the burnt offering, the meal offering, and the peace offering, are called sweet savor offerings. The last two, the sin offering and the trespass offering, are called restoring offerings. Anybody have any questions on these offerings?
Hey, Lane,
Yeah.
and you probably will get to it, but where does the first fruits and the harvest that is given to God, is that an offering or is that just the law?
Yes. That's an offering. That's one of the harvest offerings.
Okay, yeah.
We got to look at that when we get into the feast.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Lane, this is, yeah,
Go ahead.
Lane, this is Tess. I have a real quick question. As you were describing the different offerings, it made me think of Abraham and Isaac. Which one of those offering types was that set up to be?
Good question.
I think of peace. I think
None of the
peace.
above.
But yeah. So,
Well,
but Abraham would have done it because it would have been within the law, right?
It was 500 years before the law was given.
yeah, the law had not been given yet. But we may be able to make a relation. I suspect it was a sin offering is what it was, his purpose.
Yeah.
Lane, I have a question.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were a lot of sacrifices going on daily. They had no drainage system. Where did all his blood go? It must have really smelled. And it was near the rest of the congregation.
I admit that I've had the same thoughts that especially during Yom Kippur, they said
250,000 lambs.
Yeah, blood flowed like a river.
Yeah. But even this daily, I think they ran down a hill and they poured gallons of water to wash it away to the river down below. But here it's just flat land, and it's always at the base of the altar over and over and over, and it had to pile up.
I
Yep.
mean,
Isn't this before the physical temple is built? And so they just pick up the tabernacle and the tent and move to another camp.
well, that's while it was the tabernacle, but there was a long period when the tabernacle was set up and then eventually moved to Jerusalem by David. And then, of course, there's the temple period after Solomon built the temple. So,
But the temple had a drainage system that went down into a river of blood that came out of the Temple Mount, I thought. And I might be wrong. So I think while they're in camp and while they're moving, they probably can move out of the stench. But once the permanent temple was in place, I think they accounted for that, but I may be wrong.
no, you're probably right. And like I said, I thought about this. I said, this is God's plan. This is God's doing. There must be some way that's dealt with. And I don't mean in a literal human viewpoint way. I meant in a divine viewpoint way. Maybe it just didn't stink. I don't know.
And obviously,
Yeah,
when
I had the same thought that you had, Barry.
when God supplied water, it wasn't just a faucet or something. It was a river of water that came out. They could probably bathe in it, drink it, and they're out in the desert.
Yeah, right.
So that must have been strange. They must have had a good water supply.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the tabernacle and the temple. I gave you all a diagram. I didn't intend for it to be brought up, the picture to be brought up on the screen. It was merely meant for your personal use. So you could look at that diagram, print it out or view it on screen. And you could see some of the, Clarence Larkin was the artist. his interpretation of what he thought this stuff looked like based on scripture. And you might find it helpful. Well, we're going to talk about the tabernacle and the temple a little bit right now. There are two key elements of these offerings, and the ones we'll look at later under the subject of the feast days of the Lord. And that's the tabernacle, which was the tent that was the center of worship, mainly while the Israelites were on the move, and later the temple that was built by Solomon. Both share the same basic layout, but the tabernacle was designed to be portable and move with the children of Israel in their 40 years in the wilderness, while the temple was built of stone and wood and permanently located in Jerusalem. The tabernacle is described as a tent, but it's not a tent in the sense that we think of a tent for camping. It's much more complex. The tabernacle was also known as the tent of the congregation. It was the portable earthly dwelling place of Yahweh, used by the Israelites from the Exodus until the conquest of Canaan. Moses was instructed at Mount Sinai how to construct and transport the tabernacle with the Israelites on their journey through the wilderness and their subsequent conquest of the Promised Land. After 440 years, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem superseded it as the dwelling place of God. The main source describing the tabernacle is the book of Exodus, especially Exodus 25 through 31 and 35 through 40. These passages describe an inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, created by the veil suspended by 4 pillars, and it was a 10 cubic cube. Now, a cubic is about 18 inches. This sanctuary contained the Ark of the Covenant with its cherubim-covered mercy seat. An outer sanctuary, which is called the Holy Place, contained a gold lampstand or candlestick. On the north side stood a table on which laid the showbread. And the south side was a menorah holding 7 oil lamps to give light. On the west side, just before the veil, was the golden altar of incense. The veil was constructed of 4 woven layers of curtains and 48 15-foot tall standing wood boards overlaid in gold and held in place by its bars and silver sockets, and was richly furnished with valuable materials taken from Egypt at God's command. The tabernacle was always set up with its entrance facing east. The temple in Jerusalem was built with its entrance facing east. Messiah is said to be coming from out of the east at the second advent. When camped, the 12 tribes always camped in a specific order around the tabernacle. When they decamped, they did so in a specific order and marched in that order. It had to be all very organized and disciplined to manage so many people.
Hey, Lane,
Yeah.
an interesting thing that we saw in studies, Chuck Missler pointed out that the different tribes had different numbers, and some tribes were much larger and some were much smaller. And when you took the arrangement of these tribes and who was located, whether east, west, north, or south, and you laid them out around the tabernacle being the center, when you looked at the tribes and where they were positioned, it forms a very nice cross. And I can share that picture with you, but that he does, but it's quite amazing listing the tribes, and the smaller ones, of course, were at the, probably the east and west, a smaller one at the north, but then the largest tribe at the base. And it does form a perfect cross. So very interesting.
The Ark of the Covenant. The Ark is described in Exodus 25, 10 through 22, and 37, 1 through 9. Let's look at the shorter one, Exodus 37, 1. Bezalel made the Ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half was its length, a cubit and a half its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. And he overlaid it with pure gold inside and outside, and made a molding of gold around it. And he cast for it 4 rings of gold for its 4 feet, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other side. And he made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold, and put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark. And he made a mercy seat of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half was its length, and a cubit and a half its breadth. And he made 2 cherubim of gold, and he made them of hammered work on the 2 ends of the mercy seat, 1 cherub on one end, 1 cherub on the other end. Of one piece with the mercy seat, he made the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with their wings and their faces one to another, toward the mercy seat with the faces of the cherubim. I believe there's an illustration of the the Ark of the Covenant. Couldn't get spitted out in that illustration that I attached. The Ark of the Covenant is so called because the 10 commandments of the Mosaic Covenant are deposited in it. It contains 3 items: the tablets of the law, Aaron's rod that budded, and the pot of manna. It is also called the Ark of the Testimony because it witnessed God's holiness and the people of Israel's sinfulness. It is also called the Ark of God to indicate God's presence with Israel. As a symbol of divine presence, the ark was carried at the head of the column in the wilderness and later the army, thus indicating divine protection of the Jews while in transit. The Ark of the Covenant was involved in the crossing of the Jordan in Joshua. We see this, where the ark held back the water while the Israelites crossed. The ark was used as an offensive weapon in Jericho. The ark was later captured by the Philistines, but they had nothing but trouble with it, so they sent it back, which I thought was very hilarious. The ark stayed at Kiriath Jearim until David moved the ark to Jerusalem. At one point, it was about to slide off the cart, and an escort reached out to push it back onto the cart and died immediately for touching it. The ark could be handled only by select people. Solomon had the ark put in the temple when it was built. It stayed there except during the reign of Manasseh, who put up phallic images in the Holy of Holies. It was later restored by the Levites. The ark was destroyed in 586 BC under the 5th cycle of discipline by Nebuchadnezzar. There's no record of it ever having been replaced. Why? Well, for one, it's because it's no longer needed. What's the symbolism of the ark? The wood represents Christ's humanity, and the gold represents his deity, combined together in what's called a hypostatic union. The tables of the law represent sin in the sense of transgression of known divine laws. Aaron's rod that budded represents sin in revolt against God's order. The pot of manna represents sin as a rejection of God's provisions. Sin inside the ark is a picture of the work of the cross. Christ bore our sins inside of himself. The mercy seat is God's side of the cross. The cherubs represent the perfect righteousness and justice of the Father, both of which are satisfied by the blood of Christ sprinkled on the mercy seat. In the millennium, the presence of Christ replaces the ark. Any questions or comments on the ark?
I never knew it was destroyed. I mean, I know Nebuchadnezzar took away a lot of stuff. There's a record in the Bible says it was destroyed.
That's what I got out of my notes. I had never heard that before either. That it disappeared. I think the assumption is it was destroyed.
Hmm.
All right, priesthood. The priesthood was also very organized and disciplined. All descendants of the tribe of Levi could be a priest, thus the name Levitical priesthood. The tribe of Levi descended from Levi, the third son of Jacob and Leah. In order to qualify for the priesthood, the father of the candidate had to be of the clan of Levi, but the mother need only be a Jew of any tribe, but she must be a Jew. Paternity determined potential membership in the priesthood, and maternity determined the Jew's identification as the physical seed of Abraham. Bloodlines of the Levites were carefully recorded in the temple. The tribe of Levi served particular religious duties for the Israelites and had political and educational responsibilities as well. In return, the landed tribes were expected to support the Levites with a tithe, particularly the tithe known as the first tithe or the Masa'ar Rishon. The Kohanim, a subset of the Levites, were priests who performed the work of holiness in the temple. The Levites, referring to those who were not Kohanim, were assigned to other duties in and around the temple. When Joshua led the Israelites into the land of Canaan, the sons of Levi were the only Israelite tribe that received cities but were not allowed to be landowners because the Lord, the God of Israel himself, is their inheritance. Neither will they have land ownership in the millennium. In modern times, Levites are integrated in Jewish communities but keep a distinct status. There are estimated to be 300,000 Levites among the Ashkenazi Jewish communities and a similar number among the Sephardic and the Mizrahi Jewish combined. The total percentage of Levites among the wider Jewish population is about 4%. Some modern Jewish names that you may be familiar with that are usually associated with being a Levite descendant or Cohen or Kohen from Kohanim, Epstein, Levi, Horowitz or Hurwitz, Herzog, Lear, Louis, Segal, and Zimmel, to name just a few. This doesn't mean that everybody with one of these last names would qualify as a Levite or even be a Jew for that matter. Orthodox Judaism believes in the eventual rebuilding of a temple in Jerusalem and the resumption of the Levitical role. There are a small number of schools, primarily in Israel, to train priests and Levites in their respective roles. Levite lineages have and are being researched, and the articles of worship, such as vestments and worship utensils, have already been designed and produced by Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. This is according to various reports. The temple will be rebuilt, and there will be a return to temple worship during the tribulation, along with restoration of the sacrificial system. Keep in mind that the tribulation has nothing to do with the church, but will be returned to the age of Israel, the last 7 years of the prophecy in Daniel 9. There will also be a formal system of worship after the tribulation during the millennium when the Son of David, Messiah, sits on a throne in Jerusalem. While it will resemble the system under the Mosaic covenant, it will not be a return to the law of Moses and that system of worship. Like the church and the Lord's table, This millennial system will be one of remembrance of what Messiah did and will include only some aspects of the Levitical system. The only Levites allowed to serve in the millennial temple, that is the third temple, will be those who are descendants of Zadok. It was the priest Zadok who remained true and supported David during the Absalom revolution, when everyone else turned against him. Other Levites will have subordinate roles to play. And that is the end of our class for today. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments?
I got one question. In the Levitical, I guess, priesthood, I thought you had to be of the line of Aaron to be a priest, or was that just to be a high priest?
Well, no. Levite is of the line of Aaron.
I thought Aaron was in the line of Levi.
I'm sorry, you're right. Aaron is in the line of Levi.
So could you be a priest and not be a descendant of Aaron?
You had to be a descendant of Levi.
Yeah, well, Aaron was. But I thought you had to be, in order to be either a priest or a high priest, you had to be a descendant of Aaron, who was the descendant of Levi.
Okay.
So is that true? I mean, can you be a priest and just be a Levi, or do you have to be a descendant of Aaron to be a priest, or was that just reserved to be a high priest?
The Levitical priesthood is also considered the Aaronic order, indicating what you're saying.
So that would be a descendant of Aaron.
Right.
All right.
So the ark that's mentioned in Revelation is a new ark, not the original ark.
What passage is it?
11:19.
Yeah, that crossed my mind too.
Pull it up.
It's interesting, it shows up in heaven, nowhere on earth.
Yeah, I read that the other day. It is in heaven. Yet some people think it was hidden by the Jews.
Yeah, that's what I thought for a long time.
There is debate as to whether or not that is a reference to Jesus Christ as the Ark of the Covenant.
What scripture was that?
There's a lot of controversy surrounding the Ark. There is, I don't know if you read some of the writings by this, I forget the author's name now, that the Ark of the Covenant actually exists in Ethiopia. And one opinion of that is that there is an ark in Ethiopia, but it's a copy of the ark that was made by Solomon when, and I don't forget the background of the story, but it's not the true ark that's in Ethiopia. So we will probably be eternity before we know the answer to all of that.
And they won't show it to anybody.
No, I won't show it to anyone. Of course not.
There's another person, I can't remember what his name is, but if you go on YouTube, Ark of the Covenant, he claims he has seen it. And I don't remember his name, but
I think I
anyway,
saw that video myself. Some guy claims he was secretly shown the ark.
yeah, he went through and then went through Jeremiah's tunnel or something like that, and that's how they retrieved it. And it's hidden until the proper time by the Jews. They know it's there, and they're getting ready for the temple and everything, and they're not concerned about the Ark of the Covenant because supposedly they have in their possession.
Yeah. A lot of weird stuff out there, and you don't know what to believe and what's true and what's not true.
The Bible's true.
Well, that was well written. I really enjoyed reading that. I plan to read it a couple more times.
Well, I
Let it
read these
sink in.
things several times before I send them out looking for typos, and inevitably a few of them escape. I need to get an editor. Okay, I guess that's it. I'll see y'all next week. And let's close with a prayer. Thank you again, Father, for your precious word and all of the marvelous things that you have there for us to see, to learn about you and about your righteousness and about your plan of salvation. We ask that your Spirit bring these things to mind as we go through this week. We might meditate on them, and that we might be witnesses for you in Satan's world. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Lane.
Thanks,
Thank you
folks.
very much.
Thanks,
See y'all.
That
Lane.
was awesome.
Thank you.
See y'all next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
Bye.